I'm just waiting for Julie to kind of give us.
Actually, Jen gave me the floor. She said I'm supposed to introduce you. Okay, so here's what I know. Bernie was the original ambulance, correct? Way back, before the ambulance got started, that is about the time the funeral home, right? Also acted as the ambulance department. And so then after that, I'll just let Bernie tell you all the details, but he was one of the originals that started with the transporting patients. Okay? Good enough? All right, Bernie, you got the floor.
We have to elaborate on that a little bit, but before we get started, every time I see a group of people now, we had a family reunion in Bloomington this past Sunday, and my youngest brother is a dentist, or was a dentist in Sauk Rapids for like 34 years. Unfortunately, he's terminal with cancer. But he was at the family reunion, and a bunch of us were sitting around on the deck, and he told us a cute little story about the tent revival. You're all familiar with the tent revivals that they used to have down in the southern states. Sinclair Lewis wrote a book called Elmer Gantry about that whole situation. Well, anyway, they had a huge crowd of people under the big tent, and the fellow who was conducting the program gave about an hour and a half of hellfire and brimstone. It was just a roaring and a going like they do, you know, a whole bit. And when he got done, he said, well, now we're going to do the healing. So a number of people came up to him and had ailments of different kinds, and he was working on them. And finally, this fellow got up in front of the line, and he said, what can I do for you, brother? He said, well, I'm worried about my hearing. So he went up to him and he put his hands on his ears, you know, and he did a whole bunch of incantations, and he spit on his fingers and rubbed him in his ears and did a whole bunch of stuff. When he got all done there, he said, I'm sure you're much better by now. And he said, well, not really. My hearing isn't until Friday. So anyway. Well, Julie said that I was one of the originators of the ambulance service in Melrose. That's not quite true. The reason that I had an ambulance service in Melrose was because I had the only vehicle in town that would work for that kind of thing. My predecessor, how many of you remember Elmer Schonecker? Is there anybody in the room here that remembers Elmer? A few of you do, yeah. Elmer was my predecessor, and he was the funeral director here for like 20 years. And he had the ambulance service before I did. And in fact, when I came here, when Mary and I came here to look at the funeral home, he showed us through. And then he took us out in the garage and said, here's your ambulance. And I said, like, what? I said, I don't know anything about that. He said, well, I didn't either. He said, just use your common sense. So we wound up with an ambulance. The ambulance at that time was a Cadillac hearse. And for whatever reason, Elmer had purchased this thing, and it was white on the top and pink on the bottom, if you can imagine that. But anyway, it served the purpose. We had a siren under the hood, and we had a bubble that I could put through a hole in the roof and hook up the electricity to, and throw a cot in the back, and go. And our equipment was very, very minimal. It was just a cot, and there was a container up in the front of the back of the thing that you could open the door, and there was what we would call an emesis bowl there in case somebody had a barf. And first aid kit, we had that. And as I recall, we moved into Melrose on October 15th, 1966. And the former owner, Mr. Schonecker, left the day before we moved in to go to Texas to visit his son. We had a visitation. We moved in on Saturday afternoon. We had a visitation Sunday, and a funeral Monday, and a visitation Monday afternoon, and a funeral Tuesday. And I didn't even know where the heck the light switches were. But thank God I had a fellow named Ted Wells in town, who some of you will remember, who was our helper. He had been Elmer's helper and Elmer's predecessor helper, so he had lots of experience. And I really relied on him. But anyway, I'm sitting there through the course of these two funerals. I'm brand new, as I said, sweating bullets, because I thought to myself, what happens if I get an ambulance call? I don't know where to start. Thank God that didn't happen. But I do recall on Monday morning when we had the funeral service here in Melrose at the Catholic Church that Father Hemmelgarn, who was an assistant pastor, was supposed to have the funeral mass at 10 o'clock. Ted and I came to church, got the body into church at 10 o'clock and no priest. And we stood there for about 10 minutes, and of course I'm starting to be my first one and no priest. So Ted finally went over to the rectory, and the pastor was over there, Father, what was his name?
Yep.
Help me out, Mary. Who was pastor when we came
You're
here?
asking the wrong person. I can't remember anything.
I thought I had the only bad memory in the family. But anyway, he said to Ted ran over to the rectory, and he said, who's going to say the Mass? And he said, I already said mine too. I can't do anything for you. Well, it turned out Father Himmelgarn went out to Ward Springs to say a Mass that morning. And such a beautiful fall morning, he decided to drive all the way around the lake and look at the leaves, forgot all about the funeral Mass. Walked in 20 minutes late. Thank God that never happened again. But anyway, as we went along, I think it was maybe 2 weeks here, and we had a little snowfall one Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon, 3 of our local kids were tooling down Main Street about 50 miles an hour. Lost control of the car, and back at that time there were a row of trees right along where the city maintenance facilities are now. None of you probably remember that row of trees, but I sure do, because they slid right into one of them. And somebody called me for the ambulance, and I got into it, and tearing down the street and came on the scene of the accident. Here's a kid sitting on the curb. And this is a little gross. I hope nobody passes out when I talk about this, or maybe I shouldn't. But anyway, he had some severe head injuries from bumping into the windshield, and he was just a... So the first thing I did, I ran right for my first aid kit. And I got it out, and then I thought to myself, you idiot, the hospital's 4 blocks from here. That's their job, not mine. So that's what we did over the years. Anybody was hurt or in a car accident or whatever, we just loaded them up best we could and took them to the hospital. So, Melrose is a little different community geographically. I don't know how many of you know of any town our size that has a freeway running through it, a river running through it. Oh, by the way, that's a great movie and book. A river runs through it. And a railroad track that ran through it when we first came here. And, of course, a collection of street signs that, to me, never made any sense. That's all going to be changed next spring. We start putting in new street signs. And, you know, you get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning and somebody's in a total panic. Where's your address? What's your address? Well, I live on 34th, 5th Avenue Northeast, Southwest. Where the hell is that? You know? And somebody would call from out in the country. And what I would say to them is that get somebody out on Highway 4, for instance, at halfway between Greenwell and Spring Hill. Get somebody with a car out on Highway 4 and lead me into the place. So that's kind of the way we operated, and it seemed to work pretty good over the years. I've made notes because I'm 79 years old. The memory doesn't work quite as good as it used to. Another feature that happened while we were here with the ambulance service was the construction of the freeway through. And being that there was still a lot of traffic on the old highway, which was about as dangerous a road as you could take, and some on the new freeway, we had numerous ambulance calls on that freeway. The railroad was another problem. When I came here, people told me, they said, you will have a fatality on the railroad crossings in Melrose every year, at least once a year. Folks, how lucky we were, it never happened. All the while I was here with the railroad tracks, we've never had a fatality within the community. But I have to tell you that in a 3-year period, I was involved in 19 fatalities on highway crossing from Freeport, including Sauk Center in the back. Sauk Center twice, 6 kids in a car. Oh, the one time there were some adults too. Those were really challenges. But we were able to survive and get through it all, bad back and all. Lots of goofy lifting. Over the years, when I first came here, I should tell you this. When Elmer presented the ambulance to me, he said, by the way, he said, you will be subsidized to the tune of $800 a year by the city. And he said at one point I wanted to get out of the ambulance service because my back was starting to bother me and the whole bit. And he said that was their way of preventing or presenting an incentive to me to keep it. So you will be getting $800 a year as an incentive to keep the ambulance. Well, you're shaking your head. So it worked out. We were able to manage it. It was a pain in the butt at times, you know. I'd get the hearse all cleaned up and ready for a funeral at 10 o'clock in the morning and have it parked out in front all ready to go, and at 9:30 the phone would ring and somebody needed the ambulance someplace, and it was the only one we had, so we had to go and just make do as best we could. I remember going out to the lake with Ted Wells one morning when we had a funeral just about to start, and we knew if we made the call quick and got back to the hospital and got back, we'd be on time. We got out and it was an elderly man who was hurting, and as we were loading him on our cot, his son or grandson was standing there next to him, and he said, "Don't you worry about a thing, Mr. So-and-so." He said, with what these people are going to charge you, they could carry you into the hospital in Melrose. I just kept right on working, and Ted looked at him and he said, "Hey, just a minute." Another time we took an old fellow from Greenwald who fell and damaged his shoulder really bad to the Vets Hospital in Minneapolis. And if you didn't get to the Vets Hospital in Minneapolis by 4 o'clock, you couldn't get a patient in there. Well, we were about 15 minutes late, and there was a guy walking around there who was the head official, and he had a big tummy and his pants were about this size, grumbling and groaning. And finally Ted looked at him and he said, "Hey," he said, "we couldn't get him to break his shoulder any sooner." So we had some humorous things go along through those times. But in 1970, the state passed a law that said in order to run an ambulance service, you had to have a certain level of equipment, vehicle, and personnel training. And I didn't have any of it. So I went to the city manager and I explained to him what was going on and that I was getting out of the ambulance service. I said, in 6 months I'm going to be getting out of the ambulance. "Oh no, you can't do that. We're paying you to keep that in. You can't do that." I said, "Al, you're not listening to me. In 6 months the law is changing as of August 1st when laws change. I believe it's August 1st. And I'm going to be out of the ambulance service because I in no way can I rise to the level of the service that's required now." And I said, "I will help you in any way I can to get a new service established." And so he and I and a couple other people drove around to Wilmer and St. Cloud, and we looked at the ambulance services that they had, and Melrose was able to fulfill the requirements by presenting to you people and to the customers in the whole area here a wonderful, wonderful ambulance service. We have 3 beautiful vehicles, we have trained personnel, we have a wonderful group of EMTs, and I must congratulate you people that have worked with all these years on what a wonderful service that you have. Before I stop talking, I certainly need to say thank you to some people that helped us so much during those times. My wife Mary, who the minute I walked out of the funeral home had not only the kids, because we lived in the funeral home, but the phones, funeral home phones, and if I had a visitation going on, sometimes she had to step out and help with that. Ambulance call? I remember one night we had 2 visitations going on, and I went up to the service station on the corner to see if the fellow would clean my hearse in the morning, because I just didn't have time to do it. And about that time, a fellow who was a police officer, but he was off duty, walked in and said, "I just came in from the lake and there's a car tipped upside down in a field out north of town, about 1.5 miles or 2 miles, right by the curves out there." So I thought, well, I just checked that out. So I ran back and jumped in the ambulance and drove out there. And the car is turned over, there's a bunch of people around there, and no driver. And I'm thinking to myself, the worst scenario always hit me in the head. This is somebody that tipped a car over and got a head injury, and they're wandering around out in the field somewhere. So we established a search party, and it was wet and muddy, and I'm walking through mud that deep in the cornfield with my suit and good shoes on. She's taking care of the 2 visitations back at the funeral. We never did find anybody. Later, I found out that the kid who tipped the car over was over in the bar in New Munich bragging about the fact that he wrecked his car. There were some frustrating times too. And back then, you know, the ambulance charges weren't all that much, and so you'd send out a bill and never get paid, but it wasn't a big deal. I recall one time in town here, a fellow called, an older fellow, and he said, "You got to come and take my wife to the hospital." I said, "Okay." So I called Ted at his little grocery store. He met me on the curb, and he said, "Where are we going?" And I told him, he said, "That lady's a hypochondriac." He said, "You'll be taking her to the hospital every month." We went over, we loaded her up and took her to the hospital, and a month later the old gent called me again, and he said, you gotta come and take my wife to the hospital. But he said, this time, he said, don't bring that Wells guy with you. He said, I'll help you, and then you can send me a bill for $10. The original was $15. Boy, folks, I don't know what's in the air. We need a hard freeze. My nose is running today. Must be the ragweed or something. But anyway, lots of fun over the years. And getting back to thanking people, Mary, you'd be number one on my list, of course. Our daughter Julie worked at the funeral home for a number of years. She told me, she was just a little girl, she said, when you would go out on an ambulance call during the night, Dad, she said, I always woke up. And she said, I'd go sit on the floor cross-legged and look out my window on the north side of the building waiting for you to come back. One morning, Ted and I went, no, Norm Ottman and I went out to St. Rosa for a funeral. And we always came into St. Rosa from the north side because we could park the hearse right south of that long walk that goes up to the church, and that worked out well, and the family cars parked behind us up the street and so forth. Well, that morning, as I pulled the lead car past that sidewalk, I looked up towards the church, and here this fellow was escorting his elderly mother into the church, and she was going to take the first step up, and she went right over backwards on the sidewalk. And I knew just looking at her that she was gone. But I grabbed Ted, I pulled up and parked, and I ran back to the hearse, and I said, get the pallbearers together and get the casket out of here and get it up to church. And Elmer Gangle had a bar across the street, and he was just walking across the street, and I said, Elmer, get in that thing as soon as it's empty and drive it up and back it up on by that sidewalk. I hollered at somebody else, go ahead and get Monsignor Wiseman out here. And somebody else was coming across the street, and I said, go find me a blanket quick. And Ted took the procession up and got him into church, and we backed the hearse up and put her in a blanket and put her in a hearse. Mary said she was making beds upstairs, and she said, oh, once I hear the ambulance whistle going off, she said, what the heck, they just went to St. Rose. And I came whipping in the tower and around the corner of the house building. So it was fun and games. I had great help back then. Ted Wells was the original fellow that helped me. Ted Manning helped some. Sheldon Woody helped me for a number of years. He was great. Norm Ottman and I worked together for 25 years, working on funerals and ambulance services. The man was an absolute saint. Never one time in 25 years was there ever a harsh word between the two of us. He was simply great. So we had a lot of good help. And I'm just going to conclude this by telling all of you that in Melrose we have had a wonderful 44 years here. We've seen the community progress. My God, I can't tell you about the potholes that were in the street in front of our funeral home when we first came here. But the community has done well. We've enjoyed our time here. We passed our ambulance service on to a great group. You do a superb job, and we love you all. Thank you. Questions, anybody? Probably not.
How much training did you have, Bernie?
Well, let's see. I was born and raised and grew up on a farm in southeastern Minnesota. Carry your cattle. After I graduated from high school, I spent 9 years doing lots of different things, the last 2 in the service, and I met a lot of guys when I was in the service who were either college students or college grads. So when I got out of the service, I thought to myself, well, I think it's time now I start doing something. But through all of those years, I think that my experience as far as an ambulance driver is concerned would be summed up in a gesture. What you learn as you go. And many times, Ted and I would go out in an accident someplace, and you just had to use good judgment. Prom night. Get right to you, Gene. Prom night, we went out to the road between Spring Hill and the road that goes from New Munich to St. Martin. There's a Cypherman's Bridge down in there. 2 carloads of kids were chasing each other that night, and that was a gravel road at the time. And the lead car went off that bridge and down into the river, upside down. The kids coming behind them were behind them a ways because of the dust on the road. When they got across the bridge, there was no dust. So they turned around and went back. And we got called out to that, and that was a real mess. But all those people survived, and one kid did have a broken back, and we carried him out of the middle of that river. I carried a farmer, Ted and I carried a, no, not Ted. Norman and I carried a farmer with our funeral suits on through a cow yard that had a stream about 15 feet wide running through it. And got out there and got all fussed up and had a heart attack. Probably know what I'm talking about. So there were, yeah, lots of interesting. Gee, good.
What did you charge for a typical run? What did the patient
For a
pay?
child, you know, and before I start telling you the story about the little fellow in town here, the local charge at that time was $15. So that's why he said when you come the next time, don't bring that guy with you. You can send me a bill for $10. But you have to realize too that was 4 years ago. You know, things change,
Oh, I have
prices change. But along with the change in price, there's also a huge, huge change in service, reliability. I took a fellow from here down to a hospital in Minneapolis one night. And after I got him down there, I found out that he had an aortic aneurysm. And if we would have handled him in any way, shape, or manner, rough, bam, gone just like that.
And the ambulance ride is a very bumpy ride. Oh, I had to go in it, and I wasn't.
We don't charge for the bumps, Mary.
Oh, good.
Well, the vehicle is the way it is because it's used for that kind of service, and because of the way it's built and equipped and everything. Yeah, our old Cadillac hearse was probably a little smoother ride.
So I'd rather go in the ambulance.
We're very fortunate that we have the medical services, the ambulance services that we have in this community. I don't know that there's a community our size in the state that is better equipped to take care of the health and welfare of our people. I found out after my predecessor left, and I have a couple of years here, that when they decided to build a new hospital in town here, that he was dead set against it. He was a very conservative individual. He was a great guy, and he had a fantastic reputation. I remember the first funeral that we had out in New Munich, and the old priest out there shook his hand with his pipe at me, and he said, "Young man, you have big shoes to fill." I said, "I don't doubt that for a minute." And Elmer had one advantage over me. He could speak German. So that was a great comfort to a lot of the older folks here. Anyway, thank you for being a good audience. Well,
Anybody that wishes to leave, do now.
Randy talked to Roger and asked him if he would just say a few things about what it was like when he was on. She didn't know that. Randy didn't tell us.
He didn't tell her?
No, and then he decided to go four-wheeling this weekend.
Ah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So this is Roger Paschke. He was on the department. He can tell you how long. I'm not sure.
And I can't tell you the history of the entire ambulance. That is elsewhere someplace. So I joined 2 years after it started.
Okay.
Right? So I'm not with the originators, like Bernie said, Sure Metzger and Don Moore. Those people were the ones that, it was the city that formed it, but they were the first head honchos of it, all right? And I talked to Irvin today and asked when he was the first coordinator. This is Irvin Detler we're talking about. And I started in ambulance in the fall of 1972, and Irvin was coordinator then. So I think it was before 1972, but I was reading old parts of the newspaper and it said 1972 is when Irvin was coordinator. I think it was a year before that or so. So I think there's a schedule here someplace that says I'm supposed to talk about tools of the trade, which includes equipment, I'm guessing. Tools of the trade. Well, like Bernie says, his tools of the trade were his ambulance. Wasn't much of a thing there. Anyway, I'm looking over 4 different terms of things that we had for equipment. There was a hair traction, little humor here, nothing to do with fixing split hairs. We had the thumper, nothing to do with rabbits. We had the longboard, which was not a 10-foot 2x4. We had a defibrillator, which was not something you attach someone to if they told a lie. Think about it. No, it's not a defibrillator. Anyway, forget those things. Bernie said use common sense. That was his instruction, his training. Our training when we first joined, remember this, Bob? First aid. All we had to do was pass a first aid course. That's all we need to do to be certified. Don't shake your head. That was important. That's a very small thing. And eventually, you had to do an 81-hour course, which we had to do, and you have to do now, I think. Is it still an 81-hour course? And after the 81 course, for every 2 years, we had to have a 24-hour refresher course. So that was it, not mine. Somebody close the door.
It's 132 now.
132, we had 81. And then how about refresher course? We had 24 hours.
24.
24, we still do the same thing. All right? As far as the ambulance, I have a picture of one here, and you can look at it later on. I don't see one up there, but it was called, it was a 1969 International. It was called, I've got it written down, a Type 1 carry-on. It's a place where the driver and the attendant could not pass between each other. So it was closed off. We had a window we could open and talk to each other, but that's as far as it went. In November of 1970, that was the one that we got. Well, okay, November 1970 is when they got that thing, even though it was a 1961 ambulance. In 1978, they got the first kind that you have out there now. 1978. Irvin, we're talking about Irvin Detler now, in case I haven't mentioned the name, I'm going to talk about him later. He ordered a Type 3, and we got it from Road Rescue, the same people that you get yours from now down in St. Paul. And it cost $25,000 at that time to get a new one. Now, this 69 International was not very good. You can imagine the gas mileage he got, which was not very good. And it was getting old, and he wanted this one. Now, we're going to use the old one for a backup, which we did for a year or so. But he said, no, let's get 2 new ones, and then we don't have to worry about the old one for a backup. We'll sell it. We have 2 fully equipped, real nice modern ambulances. $25,000. They went to the city, and the city always says, no, I'm sorry about this. I shouldn't say that about the city. No, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. So he said, all right. So we got one for $25,000. Next year we bought another one. You know how much that one cost? $47,000. You could have gotten 2 for the price of 1 if you would have gotten it that year. So that our training was the Red Cross, and I told you about the other things we got. We always have people coming from other places to instruct us, especially when the 81-hour course came through. Mostly they were the 2 Pollards, Mr. and Mrs. from Osakas, he was the fire chief at the time, and another man from Sauk Center came to help too occasionally. And then, oh, you want to know how much we got? We got 25 cents what we got for being on call. Let's see, we're on call for 24 hours, 25 cents, I didn't get it. And service call was always $3 an hour. So I don't know how much that has changed. You don't have to tell me, but that's what we got. The average charge for an ambulance call was more if they went further from town. In town it was probably like $35. And then eventually Irv started upgrading the prices for the equipment that we had. So it became like automatic in town $55. That was minimum. Automatic $55. And then if you use some of the equipment like oxygen, et cetera, if it was an emergency, if you had to go out at night, you know, all those little things added up. And somebody complained to me from Sauk Center that, why, the Sauk Center ambulance charged $95. Is that out of line? I said, well, in town we charge $55 unless. Well, she thought it was out of line. Anyway, she used to live in Sauk Center, so she was complaining about that. Then along comes Irvin Detler being the coordinator. And Irvin is actually the person that really started getting the ambulance, as you know it now, getting it updated. I mean, not only just the ambulance, but the equipment in it and the training that we took. Irvin himself took his own time to train so he could train us as CPR instructors and doing other things. And so we went around doing those jobs at various locations. and Irvin got all that equipment we had. He made it certain that we would get proper equipment, proper training, and have the ambulance up to date. I mean, he spent a lot of his own hours just doing that, not getting paid for it, and making sure that we had people to run the ambulance corps. You might call him, if there's a father of Melrose, a father of our country, you might call her the father of the ambulance group. Not that he was the first one that started it, but he really did. And after he left, Betty took over. Irvin's theory was this: if we met somebody out in the field, well, we had to do the life-saving things. We couldn't let them bleed to death or, you know, give them CPR and all this other stuff. But the theory was, get them to the hospital fast. You know, just like you said, Bernie, get them to the hospital fast. I'm only 4 blocks away, get them there right away. We did not have a regular protocol. When Betty came along, she established, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. It had to be that way.
Or my ass is grass.
It's on tape now, so we're not going to say anything like that. So that came along, and I'm not going to speak about what we have now and who the ambulance coordinators are and what they did, because I'm not familiar with all of that. Betty.
And the one thing that people don't realize is Irvin went down to a meeting, and they were talking about the first defibrillator that was in the state of Minnesota was at the airport. There was a guy that spoke there, and he talked about it. There was a salesman there. Irvin went up and ordered the defibrillator. We had the first automatic defibrillator outside of the airport in the state of Minnesota, and nobody ever knew that.
Goodness.
He ordered it right to see. You didn't either.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
now.
Yeah,
Now
and
we know.
no one ever knew that. We got it, and the guy said, "You're the first people to order that," and we got it.
My goodness.
So yeah, the
Thank
first
you.
defibrillator out in the airport had the first one in the state.
Yeah, he really did a lot. There's no question about it. I'm going to mention the first people that I was on with. I started in 1972. At that time, Marv Niehoff, Irvin Detler, Connie Salzman, Joe Weber, Bob Derrick, sitting right here, and Edna Broxton, I believe the only lady on the corps, and Jean Frank. Now, those were the only people on the corps at the time. Later on, a whole mess of them, a whole bunch of them came on. And we had particularly a lot of nurses. Edna Broxton was a nurse, which really helped, right, with the training. And then we had a whole lot of other nurses, too, which really helped. So, from the outlying area, Irvin also had some people that could not get into town fast enough, that if there was some medical emergency, they trained with us, and people would call them, or we would call them and say, go to this site first, and the ambulance will be there later. And Greenwald, we had Angie Kulzer and Jane Welly, and Gray Eagle, we had Jerry Folta, and Bertram, Jerry Hogg, yes. And that area, we had people there, see, so we could rely on other people too. Otherwise, I really don't have anything to add unless you have some questions. That was the history when I was there. And anybody, any questions that you might ask? Why they asked me to do this, I don't know. We should maybe recognize some people like Bob Durix is here. Nobody else is in the room, I believe. Lori Jackals. And
I had one run with you, Roger.
yeah, I remember that. I don't remember which one it was,
We
but I
went to
remember
the
one.
city.
All right. Some incidents that happened that were kind of funny. Edna Broxton, Connie Salzman. Connie was driving, Edna Broxton in the back as the attendant. They took a person that was in a coma or unconscious, whatever. They drove into the University of Minnesota Hospital parking lot, which is underground, and Connie is backing up and he hits a garbage can, a tin garbage can. And that thing went rolling down there and the guy sits up and said, "What was that?" So that's one incident. I can think of a lot of funny incidents. You don't get many funny incidents in an ambulance, right? So crazy things happen to them. Okay?
My wife said I should tell you about an incident that happened to us at the funeral. We had a visitation going on, and there was a lady sitting in the back row in the chapel who was very, very pregnant. And all at once she got up and took off and went downstairs into the restroom. And her sister happened to be sitting up a little further, saw her leave, so she went down, and the sister came running back up to me, and she said, "Have you got some towels? My sister's water just broke." Oh, God, yeah. So it wound up that she wanted to be taken to the hospital.
But not here.
And I called Ted Wells to come over and help me, and we loaded her up in the back of the hearse, and I said, "You get in and ride with her." And he said, "What's the matter with her?" And I said, "She's having a baby." He said, "I'm not riding back with her." He said, "I have 8 children. I'm not riding back with her."
And I had just been shopping, and I came in the back door we lived in, and Bernie comes running out, and he said, "We need towels, we need towels." Well, that's what I purchased that day. So this lady got the brand new towels. They were the handiest. Oh,
Well, he
Lord.
didn't ask for hot water too.
Yeah, out there.
Hot water, right?
Funny.
And the best part of that was we wound up taking her from the Melrose hospital to some hospital in the city, and she didn't have a baby for a whole month.
Yeah.
So it was one of
And
those
all
miracle
this
deals, you know.
hurry. Oh, Lord.
So I thank you very much.
Okay.